Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis. This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! Dero's scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porter says, cheated!
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Odietis. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today to do kind of double duty. On one hand, Joe Lowery is going to help me preview the upcoming game against the Rapids. I think he has some interesting tactical thoughts on the Rapids and all the changes that they've been going through. But we also wanted to talk about this partnership that Sounder at Heart and Backheeled are entering into, and we wanted to share some of the thoughts there, give you a little bit. Maybe you don't know what Backheeled is, and this is your opportunity to learn a little bit more about this and why we were so excited to get into this partnership and to meet Joe. Joe's never been a guest on the show. You may recognize Joe from a lot of places. He's running Backheeled. He is on give us a rundown. What are you doing right now? You're also an analyst for Phoenix Rising now. Give us your resume, Joe.
Yeah, so first of all, Jeremiah, it is great to be here, and I have long been a big admirer of yours and of the local coverage that you guys do in Seattle, all that stuff. The quick and dirty rundown is, started Backheeled, and that's going strong, and we're super excited about all that stuff. I've done one game in my entire TV color commentary career. I've done one game, but Phoenix Rising color commentary on their local TV broadcast this year, which I'm really loving. And then you can listen to me on the Total Soccer Show and read some of my stuff. Most often these days, either for ESPN or The Guardian. I think that's a pretty safe rundown.
Okay, good. So actually, I have a broad question that we'll circle back on. But I'll tell you, the first time I think I ever heard of you, I think you were breaking, and actually maybe this is a good segue. I feel like the first time I had ever seen your content, you were doing a goalkeeping breakdown, I think of Zach Steffen when he was sort of getting into the national team picture. Maybe I'm misremembering this, but I feel like it was definitely a goalkeeping. You're doing sort of a bit on the technical aspects of a player's goalkeeping, and I think it was him. But anyway, am I making this up, or is this a real memory?
So I have goldfish brain. So your guess, honestly, is as good as mine. I have been on the Zach Steffen is not as good as everybody says he is bandwagon for years and years now. So this does sound like something I would have pitched somebody, and they would have said, like, maybe we'll circle back, and maybe I finally got it over the line.
Okay. Well, in any case, let's start with Zach Steffen. Zach Steffen was one of a handful of, I guess we could call them high-profile moves that the Rapids made, and the sort of the national narrative became like, look, they've remade this team. They hired a new coach. They brought in all these new players, and one of those big signings was Zach Steffen. But I think, like you, I was sort of shrugging my shoulders at, is this actually a big move? They spent some money on him, but Zach Steffen has sort of been a pretty uninspiring goalkeeper. And I will include, I still to this day do not understand how he won goalkeeper of the year over Stephen Fry. But let's start with Zach Steffen. Is he a good goalkeeper?
I think he's a fine goalkeeper. So I guess the answer is no. Like, I don't really think he's a good goalkeeper. I've said this stuff on Twitter before. I've written it before, and it tends to make both U.S. men's national team fans and Colorado Rapids fans pretty mad. It does a lot for Matt Turner stands out there, though. So I guess there's that.
Yeah.
There's just been really no evidence, no consistent evidence over Zach Steffen's career in Columbus, over in Germany with Dusseldorf, or over in the championship with Middlesbrough, or his time in training, I guess, with Man City. Like we just don't have consistent evidence that says Zach Steffen is a good goalkeeper. The thing that we do know about Zach Steffen is that his timing has been really, really good throughout his career. Being in Columbus, sort of timing that stretch, and this is through, not really any credit of his own, but it has worked out. Timing that stretch with Greg Berhalter's rise to prominence as a manager inside of Major League Soccer, and then breaking into the national team on the back of that. And I don't have any issue, to be clear, with Steffen being in the national team picture when Berhalter was first introduced. There weren't a ton of American goalkeepers like screaming to be involved at that time. In general, the pool was just really, really poor. So I think that was all fine, but I shouldn't say we've all, because I try to push back against this. I think a lot of folks out there still hold on to Zach Steffen as if he's the player maybe he was for one good year in Columbus, or like maybe that goalkeeper of the year award was deserved, which I agree it was not. And I haven't seen through 3 games in Colorado him be any real asset to this Chris Armas team.
I guess I'll ask you to be a devil's advocate here. Clearly, people believe in his talent. What is it that people are seeing in him that just isn't? Because I'm with you. I see the performance, and I'm just, where's the, like, there's no there. There's no there. Like, sure, he'll make some good saves, but it's not hard to. You can go out to the training pitch of any MLS team on any day of the week, and you can see goalkeepers making spectacular saves.
Yeah,
this is not a particularly hard to find attribute. What is it, though, that about Zach Steffen that seems to spark the imagination of a Greg Berhalter, who, I mean, I think is a pretty good, he knows what he's doing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Greg Berhalter knows more about soccer than we do. That I think we both say pretty readily. So for Steffen, so much of it to me falls down to, or comes down to, his ability to play with his feet, which I want to be clear, I don't think is elite by any stretch of the imagination. I really don't. But the crew, when Steffen was playing under Greg Berhalter, he had Will Trapp playing deeper downfield. You had Higuain pulling the strings as a number 10. That was a fun team. Artur sitting deep in midfield. That team wanted to play with the ball, and they were sort of bucking a lot of the tactical trends that we were seeing, or they were at least going towards the more extreme end of the possession spectrum and the build-up stuff. And having Steffen be that guy at a time when I think some of the tactics discourse globally was really, really high of, wow, like, look at what these teams over in Europe are doing. Like, look at all the tactics writers that are out there. And I sort of have been, and I guess kind of still am one of those people. We all just got really interested in goalkeepers playing with their feet and the value that could add. And between that and the fact that Steffen is an athletic dude, like 6'3", or at least that's what's listed online. Who knows if that stuff's accurate, but I've been next to this guy. He's a big dude, like athletic, is explosive. He has a lot of the tools. But your point, I think, Jeremiah, is a really good one. There's a lot of goalkeepers in MLS and around the world who are really good and look really good when you watch them play. And then relative to their other really good peers, maybe they don't stand out quite so much.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's pull back a little bit more. What has been your impression of the Rapids so far this year? Has the change that we were promised, or that was hinted at, do you think it's shown up on the field yet through 3 games?
Bits and pieces, but consistently, no, I don't. And the Rapids really have been a reminder. And I know this isn't maybe the most sexy way to lead into like a match preview where we're looking for real insight into a team. And there's still plenty that we can get into, but they've been a reminder of the perils of making sweeping conclusions from 3 games. And here's why I say that. You lose 4-1 to the Portland Timbers. Am I allowed to say the Portland Timbers on this show?
You're allowed. Yeah. It will be bleeped out in.
All right, great. Sorry, you have 2 of those to do. That's my fault. Like that 4-1 loss in Portland, they were down 3-0 30 minutes in. Like they were down 4-0 at halftime. At that point, any hope that the Rapids had of being what a lot of us, myself included, kind of still think the Rapids are going to try to be under Chris Armas, which is play in a 4-4-2 defensively, try to press high up the field, try to congest, do the Jurgen Klopp thing of, we don't have a top playmaker. Georgie is a good player. Maybe we'll get to him later. But like, we don't have a Emmanuel Reynoso, or certainly not a Lionel Messi, or anybody even in that stratosphere. So we're going to let the press create our chances for us. We're going to work as a unit to create the chances that maybe other teams delegate to one player. You don't have a chance to do that when you're down 4-0, because at that point, your opponents have no incentive to go forward. The Timbers scored 4 goals on 7 shots. They were done at halftime. Their job there was done at Providence Park. So you don't really get a chance to go out there and press. Then the next game, you're 1 game in, 1 loss. The next game, a 1-1 draw for Colorado at home to Nashville. You're playing a Nashville team without Hani Mukhtar and without Sam Suric. Like, they don't have their attacking talent. We know Gary Smith's team doesn't want to be adventurous anyway. You take away their two best attacking players, oh boy. Like, that team does not have any interest in being adventurous. They have no interest in trying to play through the press. So we didn't really get to see the Rapids go all out defensively in that match either. Then finally you get to the RSL game, and I felt like this was the first time that we saw even consistent, semi-consistent glimpses that create some chances off the high press. They're attacking a little bit more narrowly. It's not Red Bull ball. It's not St. Louis City ball. It certainly hasn't been so far. But I do think that's the direction this team wants to go, even if they haven't had all the chances to actually go out there and show it just yet.
So let's look at this game against RSL. I watched the game. I came away feeling I feel like the result was very complimentary to the Rapids.
Yeah.
They did not they didn't tear up the RSL at all. They scored on a penalty. They got and then they scored a nice goal. But it looked to me like RSL was sort of gashing them open and getting out into space a lot, and they just sort of fell apart in the final third when they were really potentially in a position to put away the Rapids.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I would agree with basically all of the read of that game, Jeremiah. I still just haven't been all that impressed with the Rapids playing against the ball. Like, we see them in this 4-4-2 shape. I would imagine that's what we're going to see over the weekend against Seattle. It'll be Rafa Navarro and it'll be Georgi Mihailovic as the front two. Then in possession, Georgi has more of a free role. You have Cole Bassett, and against RSL, it was Omir Fernandez, who I think is the clear starter on that side because Kevin Cabral hasn't been involved, and Calvin Harris, maybe solid-ish DJ, but not a great soccer player. Like, it kind of makes sense to have Omir Fernandez, and that's going to lend you to a more narrow approach because those are really three more number 10s or even a number 8, maybe in Bassett's case, than they are wingers. So that's the general approach. But I haven't seen this team be super coordinated with their pressing. The Timbers gashed them wide open in the few moments early on at Providence Park when the Rapids did have a chance to actually go out there and press before they were down 4 goals in the blink of an eye. And against RSL, I don't think they did a great job of controlling the field either. The reality for this Colorado team right now is that they're just not very good. Like, they on talent, you can't look at this team and say, like, oh, they're scary. They don't have those players. Georgi Mihailovic is probably the only one. Navarro and Cabral are hugely underperforming designated players, like not really all that relevant when it comes to the box score stats. And individually, and this was a team against Portland, and I think we saw it some against RSL too, the backline doesn't look good. Like, Keegan Rosenberry looks like he's lost a step or two at right back. You see Maxo, and he hasn't been a difference maker. I don't know if that's because he's a bad player coming over from Europe before last season, or if it's because just the structure around him hasn't been there, wasn't there last year, and the talent's not there this year. Moise Bombito is a fun kind of upside player, but not maybe a high-level starter. Zach Steffen, we've already talked about, and Vines is still trying to find his footing back in MLS. Like, between the tactical approach, not having had the necessary reps, and maybe never becoming what it maybe should be, because do we think Chris Armas is a good coach? I'm not so sure about that. Like, there are just a whole truckload of problems for this Colorado team.
Yeah, it's funny. You look at their offseason, and obviously the big headliners were Chris Armas, the coach, Zach Steffen, the goalkeeper, Georgi Mihailovic, the playmaker, and then they kind of like Omir Fernandez sort of got thrown into this thing as if this was a big signing, and he was a very competent player for the Red Bulls, but all of a sudden it was almost like this was treated as if it was a really big signing, when in reality it's like, yeah, he's an MLS player that changed teams.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is on all that is, like, those are all fine moves. I'll talk about Zach Steffen and say, I don't think he's a very good goalkeeper. I think he's probably about league average on the whole, maybe a little bit less than that. The Rapids goalkeeping last year was horrific. Like, they were very, very close to the bottom of the league. Illich was not good. Like, they just really struggled. And so even though I don't love the Steffen move, for a team that has never shown an inclination to spend, yeah, if you want to go out there and spend a little bit more on a league average goalkeeper, like, at least you have a league average goalkeeper and at least you spent something. I don't think it's the right way to build a roster, but I guess it's like fine. So you improve in goal, and I think you do improve at left back in the form of Sam Vines. Georgie is an upgrade on talent. Same with Omir Fernandez. Like, this team got better in the offseason. The problem, and I wrote this for Backheeled in my preview for the Rapids before the year started, like, the worst case scenario for this team is probably the most likely one, in that, like, the DPs outside of Georgie are just so bad and so inconsequential that it doesn't matter what you do in the offseason. Like if you add all these pieces to a good, like to two good DPs, to a striker who's going to get you 15 goals and maybe a winger who's super goal dangerous like the Galaxy have gotten, or a number 10 who's a pure number 10, and you don't bring in Georgie as the third DP and you go get a winger or you go get something else, then this team is actually a threat in the West. But until we see those DPs produce or the system be really, really, really sharp, all the other little offseason things they did just don't play into anything that much.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Georgi Mihailovic. He is a player who the last time he was in MLS was an MVP contender. Like he was absolutely balling out. He looked to be finally sort of making good on all the promise that he had when he was coming up through the Chicago Fire, and he earned himself a nice transfer to Europe. Things didn't go so well for him in Europe, and it was pretty funny. He even tells the story himself about how, the Rapids want you, and he wasn't really that interested. And I just thought that was the funniest promo bit, which was like, I wasn't really interested in them, but then they talked me into it. And it's like, oh, okay, great. But he's come over, and it does seem a little bit like he's an odd fit, because the team that he was playing for in Montreal was Wilfred Nancy's team, who was really possession oriented. It was going to kind of run through him, and he was really a centerpiece of this kind of larger system. And now he's at Rapids, and Chris Armas is not running that system in any way, shape, or form. It looked like in the first two games he kind of got lost in the shuffle. My understanding is that this last game against RSL was probably his best game, but even then, I didn't think he was particularly influential. I don't think he's a bad player, but do you think he's a player who can thrive in this environment?
Early signs, and take this with a grain of salt, my gut says probably not, and not because I don't think he's a good player. I do think Georgi Mihailovic is a player, and we've seen evidence of this, who can contribute rather to a very, very good team in MLS. That was Georgi Mihailovic in 2022 for CF Montreal. They finished second in the Eastern Conference. That was a phenomenal season, and Georgie rightly used that to help him take the next step in his career. That didn't work out. Seems like, and I don't have any info on this, but it seems like there's some family issues or some things in his personal life that drew him back to MLS. And so that's maybe why Colorado makes sense. That interview, I agree, completely forgot about that, was hilarious. One of the top moments of the offseason. Like, all that stuff is true. And Georgie has the talent to be a very good player for this team, but they're not Montreal. Like they're not going to put him in consistent both in terms of frequency and in positioning. They're not going to put him into consistent spots to go and influence the game in the final third. It's going to be much more helter-skelter, regardless of whether they really do take hold of this maybe more Red Bull-esque style that we sort of think Armas is going to implement. So I'm not sold. At the same time, I do not put any blame on the Rapids for going out and signing Georgi Mihailovic. I think there would have been several other teams in the league who would have done the exact same thing. If you need to go out and get a player who has talent, and maybe they'll go out there and snag at least one new DP, or figure out a way to move on from one player by the start of next season. Who knows, right? Like all of a sudden, I think he's going to look better and better the more talent there is around him. But we don't have the evidence, and I don't think Georgie is the kind of player who's going to spearhead an entire attack on his own.
Yeah, and I guess and part of I don't want to be too harsh on the Rapids in that, hey, it was good to see them spending some money, and it was nice to see them spending money that wasn't just allocation money, which is sort of what they've used as a transfer fund in the past. And so, those are good signs, but it sounds like, this is MLS. Anything can happen. We just saw the Rapids beat RSL despite not playing particularly well last week. Anything can happen this week, but it sounds like the Sounders should feel like they are the favorites. This would be a bad result if the Sounders don't get all 3 points.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the thing that Seattle can always come back to right now is the injury bug, which has bitten them really, really hard. But even with that, like this Sounders team has the quality to go out there and take care of business, especially at home against Colorado. There are reasons for optimism if you're a Rapids fan, hoping that the Connor Ronan issue isn't a big one in terms of the injury. It didn't seem like that was going to be a major problem. But I actually don't know where Ronan's availability is ahead of this weekend. So that's one thing to watch for. He's a very, very good player. And you start to stack a competent tactical approach, if that's what comes out of Chris Armas this year, to a really nice midfielder in Connor Ronan, who is one of the best players in MLS at his position, just doesn't get talked about because the Rapids haven't been super relevant, to a spine of central players who I think are all decent to very good. In Georgi Mihailovic's case, Cole Bassett's a useful player. Omi Fernandez is as well. Like, there are some things to like about this Rapids team, and they totally can nick 3 points off of anybody because that's MLS.
Right.
Like, that is how
Right.
this works. But in terms of, is it a good result or a bad result if the Sounders, take care of business or don't rather? Like, yeah, that would be a little bit of a problem.
Well, since you're here, I may as well pick your brain real quickly on this. What has been your impression of the Sound? We have only seen the Sounders play 2 games in 5 minutes, and so there's not a lot of sample size yet. But their struggles to score do stretch back to last year. They were one of the lowest scoring teams to make the playoffs last year. I think I would imagine you would agree that they are defensively really well organized.
Elite.
And
Yeah.
but where do you see where do you see it breaking down in terms of their ability to they generate a lot of XG, but it doesn't seem like they generate a ton of really high quality chances.
Yeah, that's still the big issue for this team, and even them trying to generate, more and more of those really good looks. I think there's improvement to be done there. I'm not sure the needle's been moved from where it was last year, and that's not to say that it won't be moved, because now Pedro de la Vega is out for what? I mean, it was 6 weeks from the announcement came out minimum, so maybe now we're looking at 5.5 or whatever. No, it would be about 5 weeks now, maybe. Like, a lot rests on de la Vega, or a lot rests on Albert Rusnak, and we just haven't seen it. So it is really difficult, and I don't envy sort of you all as you're trying to cover this team and really figure out the intricacies when it feels like we're 3 games into the season, or we should be.
Right.
And like, we don't know. Like, everybody's gone. You're missing half your starters. Like, the LAFC game, I thought the second half was encouraging. I thought LAFC were good and not great, but I think, the DPs they have, the flexibility they have, there's a lot of potential there. And the exact same thing goes for Seattle. I've been a little surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be, and I'm curious about your perspective on this, Jeremiah. I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen Christian Roldan be drafted into playing as more of a number 10. Like, that to me feels like more of a continuous fit, and like something that fits with what we know what I think Brian Schmetzer wants to do. But instead, he's gone more with the 2 forward look with Morris and Rui Diaz in a couple of games, or tried to. That to me felt strange. Have you been surprised at all by that, or is that just me?
Well, I'll tell you that if you ask me, we did a lot of this discussion in the preseason about the Sounders depth chart, because you look at it on paper and it looks like they're pretty solid almost everywhere. But sort of the way we were doing our depth chart was we were just listing everyone once, and the backup we had behind Rusnak at center mid was Paul Rothrock, who is obviously a lower roster player. He's a player who might not make the game day roster on when the team is fully healthy. And that but to me, the obvious, if you go into a little bit more detailed depth chart, you would probably put Christian Roldan second. I certainly had Christian Roldan second. So I thought, in a perfect world, if Albert Rusnak isn't available, you just slide Christian Roldan into center mid. And to me, that's what made the most sense.
Yeah.
Now, I think best laid plans, the way this has worked out is, I have been surprised that they haven't tried that. But I think the reason they haven't tried it is because of sort of the cascading, like what it means for everything else. Yeah. So on one hand, they want to give Jordan Morris a real look as a forward, and they aren't really enamored with the idea of him playing right mid. The historical data doesn't point to him being a great solution at right mid. Maybe he's been more effective on the left, but they want to try him at forward. And so if you're not gonna, so then it becomes like, if you slide Christian over, who's gonna play right mid?
Sure.
And you have Raul Ruidiaz here sitting on the bench, so it feels like, well, let's get him on the field, and then you're kind of stuck here, right? And so I think I would think in a perfect world where you had Pedro de la Vega and you had other options, I would like to think that they would try Christian Roldan somewhere else, but I just think that they're sort of cobbling together how do we get our best players on the field in their best positions type of mentality. Yeah. And so they seem to think Raul can work sort of as almost a withdrawn forward and like a false 10. And, time will tell. I think one of the things that's frustrating that you alluded to is that the Sounders have only played 2 games. And so even though it feels in a way as if they've been banging their head against the wall and trying to make this 4-4-2 work, the reality is that they played the first game for a half or 60 minutes in that formation, and then they abandoned it essentially 30 with about 30 minutes left in that game. And so it's like we haven't really, and that was also without training on it. Obviously they started the game this last week, but we saw 5 minutes. And so I think that's what's tough. Like you said, like that's what's tough for me as who's trying to take a somewhat realistic view of what we're seeing is, well, I'd like to see what it looks like when it's like deployed in a sensible way.
Sure.
And so I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would like to see I want to see this team what it looks like when they're deployed sort of in the way that they trained all preseason.
Yes. I think that is completely fair and probably the right stance to take before doing any like crazy deep dive analysis on this team. One other Seattle thought that's popped into my brain from watching this team, and I've watched all their minutes so far this year. Like, I don't understand, but I am fascinated by Brian Schmetzer's decision to play Pedro de la Vega inside. And I want to be clear. He started as a number 10. He's wearing the number 10, starts as the number 10 versus Austin. He wasn't really fully playing the number 10, at least not always, right? The Sounders system, at least as far as I see it, is defensively, it's usually some sort of 4-4-2. In possession, oftentimes it shifts to this sort of 3-4-3 shape where you have Alex Roldan going high and wide. Maybe everybody knows this, so I don't need to go through the details. But the shape changes. And the number 10 becomes more of a half-space guy than he does like a pure string puller, right? So it's not like De La Vega was playing as a pure number 10 classic South American player, whatever. With that being said, I still don't think his best role is in the half space. I don't think it's as a number 10. I don't think it's in the half space. I think his best role is put his boots on the sideline and let him go run at players 1v1 and be the Tasmanian devil that he looked like against LAFC, that he looked like down with Lanús when he was healthy. So I am fascinated. It's entirely possible that Brian Schmetzer sees something I don't. I'm sure he sees many things that I don't about Pedro de la Vega. But I thought that was weird against Austin. And I don't think it was a huge surprise that the Sounders struggled to create a bunch of really good looks when he was inside. I don't think that's going to be a great look. And I'm guessing a lot of that's necessitated by injuries. You'd rather have De La Vega inside than you would Leo Chu. So I get that. I understand some of that stuff. But curious when he gets back to see, sort of where Schmetzer views him, because we've seen him in a couple of spots already.
Yeah, I guess it's funny because I would have been surprised if I wasn't at training and I wasn't seeing him deployed as a 10. So it's like I saw it coming. So it wasn't so much of a surprise to me because they sort of almost immediately made that decision in training that week, which was let's try Pedro de la Vega in the middle. Sure. And I think, and this is where it gets into the less tactical thought and it gets into more of this man management kind of thing. And this is sometimes I think what people have a hard time with Brian Schmetzer about is that he's sort of, so like part of the thinking on Christian Roldan is like, we keep telling you, we think your best position is as a right mid. And so in game 2, we don't want to move you back to the center. We want to, and so it's like, is that the best tactical choice to use Pedro de la Vega as the 10 and use Christian Roldan as your right mid? But like you said, when they're attacking in a 3-4-3 and they're both effectively occupying half spaces, and they're both almost behaving like 8s on either, with kind of like focused on like the 8s focusing out there. I'm making hand gestures that
I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
Yeah. I think so in that way, there is some tactical sense to it, but I agree with you. I think if I was looking at this from a distance, and even if I'm watching it like purely from a what gives us the best way to win this game type of mentality, I think it would have been interesting to see if they had put Pedro de la Vega on the right and put Christian Roldan in the middle. But, they didn't. And I agree with you. It was interesting because I thought De La Vega did a lot of things that were really exciting, even when he was playing as a 10. Like he made a couple passes that I don't think anyone else on the Sounders is capable of making or is even going to try to make. And they came off and they didn't necessarily create great scoring chances, but they were interesting ideas. And yet you're right. They created a lot more danger after he came off the field. And Raul Ruidiaz essentially came in and sort of did the thing that he they envisioned him doing,
Yeah.
I think, against LAFC. So I don't know. It'll be interesting because it doesn't quite like when all the pieces aren't there. I don't know if it fits how it fits together yet, and it's going to be
And
interesting to see how that develops.
And I think that's fine, right? Like, I don't know that there's an MLS team that you can take away this many starters and we would have real answers about, you know? Like,
Right.
there's still no doubt in my mind, even though I'm pretty far from sold on De La Vega, I am a little warmer on him now than I was when he signed. The little bits and pieces I've seen in the MLS have encouraged me a little. I think he's a good player. I think he'll add value. I'm just not sure how much. But there's no doubt in my mind that this team's going to be really, really good when everybody comes back. They should be at minimum where they were last year in terms of the attacking stuff. I think losing Ladero hurts in all sorts of ways, and you lose your most consistent playmaker. I think Rusnak can probably carry a lot of that load, and the advantage you get from De La Vega out wide, if that's where he ends up, will be tangible as well in terms of the cascading effect that has creating space elsewhere. Like this team's going to be excellent when the time comes. I guess the question is just when is that time going to come, and sort of like still where does everybody fit? Which is those were the questions we're asking before the season started.
Yeah, and I'll just end on this. I think one of the things that's frustrating for me is that we talked a lot about this offseason of there being real genuine competition, and then that real genuine competition creating a real sense of depth in this team. And so there's this sense of like, well, you said there was all this depth, and where is it? It's well, a lot of it is on the bench or is on the training table, unfortunately.
Yep.
And there was supposed to be real competition between Rui Diaz and Morris to be starting, and instead they're both starting. There was supposed to be real competition between De La Vega and Chu to be competing for starting minutes. One of them isn't available. Albert Rusnak was supposed to take over the number 10. He's not been available. And you just kind of go, there was supposed to be this real competition in central midfield between João Paulo, Josh Atencio, Obed Vargas, Danny Leyva. Like these four players were going to compete for 2 spots, and yet it's just been Obed Vargas and Josh Atencio because João Paulo, who it has not been there. So there's all these little things that it's like, like I said, I want to see how it fits together once at least most of the pieces are here. We've not seen it yet. Hopefully we start to get a little bit more of it this week. The word is that Albert Rusnak, I don't think is going to start, but I think he'll probably come on early in the second half. And like I said, hopefully we'll see some semblance of what this team was supposed to do. And we'll finally be able to draw some more tactical. Like,
yes, I need it. I'm craving it. I'm tired of treading water.
Yeah, exactly. But that brings me into a nice. I'll use that as a transition to talk a little bit about Backheeled, what you guys are doing there, why I felt really passionate about creating, getting together with you, and sort of creating this partnership that we've created, where essentially, if you are a Sounder at Heart advocate, you get a part of that membership now includes a membership to Backheeled. What can people expect from Backheeled? What is it how would you describe sort of your place in the way that Backheeled fits into the marketplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first I want to say, I have a weird, and this is just a coincidental thing, but a soft spot for the Sounders as it relates to Backheeled, because we launched in May of 2022, and something very cool happened in May of 2022, which is that the Seattle Sounders won CCL, now CCC. They beat Pumas in the final, and that was the first piece. That was like one of the launch pieces we had on the site. The very first day we launched the morning after all that had happened, and I wrote up an analysis piece of, and sort of at parts granular and at other parts more macro piece about the Seattle Sounders and how they'd won and what it means and all that stuff. And that was a cool moment. I remember still sitting there late at night, like typing out, getting the last few pieces polished up for the site. So very, very cool and fun to look back on that stuff. We've been around, as I said, since May of 2022. We've had a few iterations since then. But Backheeled, as I see it, is a place where people can go to find informative, thoughtful, creative coverage of American soccer. Not just MLS, not just MLS clubs, not just the national teams, but American soccer. Because I still believe very strongly, and this is one of the founding principles of the site, that those fans, a lot of folks that are listening to this probably, are underserved. And what you all are doing is helping to serve them. And what we all are doing is helping to serve them. There's a lot of good American soccer coverage out there. There's just not enough of it still. And more than that, like it's all well and good to go out there and create something that adds to the discourse. And that's helpful, right? We're trying to do that, but we're trying to do something a little bit more than that. And every story that I dream up for myself or for someone else and that somebody pitches, I try to look at through the lens of how does this take the narrative one step further, right? And that's what I tried to do with that CCL piece 2 years ago, now almost 2 years ago. Like, it's all well and good to write in. MLSsoccer.com is going to have a write-up of like, oh, Seattle won. That's cool, right? How did it happen? Or we tell a story. Like, let's tell a story that changes how you think about the game and some of the most interesting characters in the game. We had Sanjay Sujanta Kumar go and do a piece on the Sullivan family. And some folks might know this is well-timed after the Union game was called off. Quinn Sullivan, his younger brother, Kevin, there are two twins in that family as well, very much involved in the Philadelphia Union organization and in one of the up-and-coming families with a fascinating story inside the game. Like, just trying to be very, very thoughtful and creative of how we do everything, from analysis that there isn't a lot of really good like analysis of what happens on the field, to storytelling, to commentary, all that stuff. And we try to do that. And I think we do a pretty good job of doing that across all the domestic leagues, MLS, NWSL, USL Championship, the national teams, some other, things that tie to American soccer. So that's what we're here to do. We're trying to serve soccer fans that are passionate about the game. And we're trying to take everything that we do in the general soccer discourse and kind of push it forward a little bit in how we talk about the game, how we think about the game, what we think about the game, and the kinds of questions we ask and answer. That's I guess a long-winded way of just tying all of that into what we are trying to do over at Backheeled.com.
No, and I think what I found really attractive about the site was that it did a lot of similar. I think it takes a similar ethos to what we're trying to do, which is to raise the discourse around the game, to
Totally.
like be a place where smart fans want to have discussions and they want to get informed, and they aren't looking for necessarily hot takes or really they're not looking for controversy as much as they're looking for something that makes them think and makes them feel better about what they like, makes understanding the game easier.
Yeah.
That makes it accessible, that isn't talking down to folks and isn't just looking for clicks and like all the kind of things that I think drive people crazy about the media landscape right now. And you're not going to get just like on our site, you're not going to get overwhelmed with ads. I don't think you have any.
No,
just
yeah,
like
I don't
us, I
have
don't
any
think you have any ads right now. Not that we're at least for us, not that we're against ads, but we are. But I certainly am not. I don't want to. I do find it really like oddly, maybe not odd. I find it really satisfying to go through a site and not be inundated with pop-ups and just things that are trying to sell me on
Sure.
things that aren't why I'm there. And so I appreciate all of that, and I think you guys are doing it at with a national focus as opposed to a real granular team specific focus, and that's what I liked about it. And I think the more people are exposed to it, the more they're going to like it. And I would urge anyone who is a Sounder at Heart reader to honestly just go check it out. And even if you're not going to like upgrade your membership with us, I would hope you would consider buying a membership directly through you guys, because it's really, I think it's really important. It's to be providing this, and that there's not a lot of places right now that you can read about MLS that are not MLSsoccer.com.
Yeah.
And I think they do a pretty good job, frankly, of covering the league, but it's always going to be state-run media, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are always sorry to interrupt. There are always
go ahead.
With that stuff, right? And this ties back to what I said earlier. There's just room for more. Like there's room for more stuff, and there's a need and room for more like, really good stuff. And I hope we hit that mark more often than not. I don't think we'd probably still be around if we didn't. But there is a real need for that, and I think there's even a need for that at the national level. There is a decent amount of very good reporting out there, and that's not really our focus. If you're looking for breaking news, we break some news, but I mean, The Athletic is going to be your spot for that stuff for the foreseeable future, which is great. And I have a lot of love for what they're doing over there. In general, though, there just aren't a lot of folks at the national level, and we try to fill this gap that talk about soccer. Like a lot of stories are about important things that are happening off the field or trends or roster management, and we'll do that stuff too. But one of my things, and this has always driven me as a part of this media landscape, is I love soccer. Like I love what happens on the field. I'm fascinated by what makes good teams tick and what makes bad teams suck. Like I'm so interested by that stuff. And I hope that tone resonates with others. And I think it probably permeates a lot of our coverage. There's just room for all that stuff. And it's made possible by the folks that are generous enough or see value in what we're doing and what you all are doing. And that's another reason why like the linking these things together and providing Backheeled subscriptions to advocates over at Sounder at Heart and for you all, like makes sense, is because a rising tide, I truly believe, lifts all boats. Like we are.
Absolutely.
Maybe there's someday, Jeremiah, like 100 years from now, and we're both dead. That like the American soccer landscape is so concentrated that we can afford to be cutthroat.
Right.
I don't think I will live to see that day. And so like I just so firmly believe that we are in this state where rising tide is going to help everybody. And I hope even in this weird kind of fractured landscape that we're in, that what we're doing can help with that.
Yeah, and I always like to remind people that when I first started covering soccer, the number of people who were treating American soccer like a full-time job was really, really small. And we've made some great progress in terms of like just turning this into a viable, at least part-time and in some cases full-time operation. And that's great, but we still have so much farther to go. We see it all the time. We see these great outlets just sort of like dumping their content, and they are and you can imagine how soccer is oftentimes the first beat to go on almost any sports website, general sports website. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Backheeled is that these are people passionate about the sport. They enjoy, they want to watch games. They want to talk about games. It's not just, punching a clock and saying this is how I got rich. And I think that's what's great about, honestly, about the soccer media landscape in some ways, is that almost no one's in this to make money. It's almost always people that want to do it because they're having fun.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And honestly, like maybe that's something I should have thought about by now. I've never thought about it quite in that lens of comparing it to maybe a larger sports website or even local beats or local papers or whatever it is that it is the soccer person who's also doing, and I've come across plenty of these people, I'm sure you have too. It's also doing high school track or that's doing like, high school football or whatever it is, right? It's always the second beat or it's always half the beat or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And the fact that I am truly thankful for the writers that we have. I think we have a lot of really talented folks that write about the game, and like, and that's not unique to us necessarily. Like a lot of sites that are continuing to way forward, and the passion and the talent that's in these people is very real. I think we've got some of the best folks out there, and I really do believe that. And I think their passion and knowledge and desire to continue to grow their own knowledge and passion, and as it extends towards their work, like I think that's evident in a lot of the stuff that we're doing, or at least that we're trying to do. So yeah, it's a fascinating point about the love for the game and how having those kinds of people can really help a product.
Yeah, I mean it's the thing that I found most refreshing. I spent, I've told this story many times, but I spent over a decade working in newspaper sports departments, and the number of people that were just burnt out and didn't really enjoy the job was understandable, but it comes across in the product. And that's something that I've been really, really happy about the soccer media world, is just that it seems like almost everyone, they might not love their job every day, but they do enjoy doing this. And the reason they're doing it is because they enjoy it. And it's not, that's really their motivation. And so I wanted to say that I just wanted to also say I appreciate what you guys are doing. I love what you guys are doing. And I'm really, really excited about, seeing where this goes and hopefully seeing it grow and hopefully our readers find value in it too.
Well, thank you, Jeremiah, sincerely. And I am equally high on what you all are doing. And I've said this before, said it to you, I've said it other places as well. Like, you all have set the standard for what it looks like to cover an American soccer team inside and out. And I hope that we continue to see more of that. I think we are seeing more of that across the landscape. Again, that is a great thing for everybody. It's a great thing for fans. It's a great thing for everybody involved in this whole process. And so you all are doing a fantastic job of paving the way and making it at least a little bit easier for the rest of us, whether it's at the local or the national level, to keep on trucking.
Well, I really appreciate that. Anything else you want to close with before we get out of here? I realize we've been going on a little bit longer than I had intended. So anywhere else that people can find your work that are you still doing the podcast? I want to tell you, I stole your idea, the mini podcast idea.
Yes.
And
Welcome. Join. We are still doing the mini podcast, the Backheeled Show. Folks can go and find that 10 minutes or less twice a week. I would love to continue to expand that as I have time. We'll see if that happens. I'm fascinated by the mini podcast idea. I was going to go on a Danny
think it's great.
Wasowski rant. Maybe I'll make this my rant instead. And by rant, I mean like positive one, because I think Danny Wasowski is a good player. I love it. I think there is a lack of like bite-sized consumable content. There's so many good podcasts out there. I'd like to say I'm a part of one with the Total Soccer Show, which is not my baby, but kind of feels like one now with Taylor Rockwell and Graham Ruffin and Ryan Bailey. I love doing the show with those guys. It's tons of fun. I feel like there's room for something that's a little bit more bite-sized and like afternoon walk kind of length rather than maybe like rush hour commute kind of length. So welcome. I want more people on board with that.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it. I think, and when I say I fully stole this idea from you.
It is.
Like, this was 100% an idea that came about after hearing your mini podcast and being like, no, we could do that.
Yes, good. More. I love it.
So anyway, well, thank you so much for doing this, Joe. We hope to hear from you more often in the future. And I just want to say again, I really enjoy backheeled.com. I would urge all of our listeners to go out and look at the site, look through it, and hopefully you find like you want it. This is something you want to support, and hopefully you want to support both of us. So thank you so much.
We love you. Let's win another one.